I'm back for Repot Fest Part 2. If you're into Anthuriums, I have a load of Anthuriums for you. Hello planty people, I'm Nick from Proppist. You're here for planty content, I've got you covered. So today we're going to go through a bunch of these guys that I needed to repot. Previously, we went through a whole bunch of seedlings. If you haven't seen that video, check up here in the card above. I will link that for you. This is part 2, and we're going to go through some of the bigger ones. Still babies, but a bit bigger babies. All Anthuriums, and you're going to have some fun watching me repot them one by one, so stay tuned. In my last video, we talked about baby Anthuriums. This time, we're talking about some seedlings. These are a little bit larger, so you can see kind of the growth difference as we go through. A bit more variety this time. I think last time we had a lot of papillolaminum crosses and hybrids. These are, for the most part, not Papis. We are going to go through one by one and repot. Most of them are in moss, I believe, a couple in water, and we're going to be putting them into different substrates. I've got the majority of these are going into a mix of tree fern fiber and perlite. This is kind of, I don't want to say it's 50-50, but it's probably about 70-30. I already pre-moistened this because in this case I'm not using draining pots. These are little cups that don't have any drainage, so I don't want to have to pour water in there, so I did pre-moisten for this time around. So picking up where I left off from the last time, let's get to it. I've still got 3 plants that are hanging out, and some of these are actually pretty sweet. So I've got 2 more that are sitting in moss here. These are slightly bigger plants. This guy is an Anthurium hoffmannii red Sinus. I'll show you a picture of what this guy looks like. Big, pretty sweet looking plant. He is currently sitting in moss in a reasonably good sized container. I went to put this guy into tree fern just because I feel like the moss is obscuring the roots and potentially getting too moist. So I'm just gonna get it out of here. I had put this in moss originally when my order came in, and I just kind of tossed it into moss quickly to have something for it to sit in. That's been a couple weeks now, so I figure it's probably time to move it into a better substrate. I think what I'll do is these guys are going to end up in the same containers they were already in with slightly different substrates. Probably just go with the fern, tree fern for both of them as well. So I ended up mixing in the rest of my tree fern and perlite that I had in my big metal bowl there. That's all I have. So I'm going to see, hopefully this will last me for the next 2 plants, and that will be enough to fill those 2. Otherwise I'm going to have to mix some more. So I'm going to pop these guys out. Let's start off with the one I just mentioned, the hoffmannii red Sinus. So in this case, I'm going to use the exact same container that it's in. I'm just going to swap substrates. So I'm going to take this guy out. I think it hasn't been in here that long. Ooh, wow. Looks like the roots are pretty good. I'm hoping that I won't have to do too much cleaning here. Let's pop all this stuff out. Yeah, this looks pretty good already. So I'll give that a wipe down. I'm also hoping that I won't have to peel off too much sphagnum moss from the roots, and right now it looks pretty good. So the roots are all right in here. So this guy I acquired, like I said, I think it was in early January or mid-January. So I've had it for about a month or so. It has, I can't remember if it came with this leaf already. It does have a little bit of damage from transit shock, but the newest leaf is the biggest leaf, and the biggest leaf looks pretty good. So I'm satisfied with that. It does also have what looks like some starting aerial roots. Yeah, the root system is pretty solid on it, so I'm not particularly concerned about it. This guy has been sitting along with my other Anthurium seedlings, and this one's been acclimating just because it was traveling, and this came from Indonesia, I believe. So I'm going to give the roots a wash here, and again, I'm not going to go too crazy on this, just making sure that it's looking all right. Since it's going into tree fern, I'm not super concerned about leaving on the odd little piece of moss. But I mean, that's a pretty healthy looking root system already for such a small plant. So that guy's good, and that is my hoffmannii red Sinus. I think I will show you guys a picture of one large if I've got one floating around. All right, this last guy, this one is from Lauren at North Shore Tropicals. This is magnificum x forgetii. So this is actually, I believe, a hybrid that Lauren created with her existing plant. So I'm not sure what the parent plants look like for this guy, but he's already looking pretty nice. And I'm a big fan of forgetiis in general, and I really do like the look of them. And I thought like magnificums can get nice and beefy and big, so a hybrid would be a nice combination. I'm just gonna see if I can plunk this guy out. So this guy came in this container, little tiny orchid pot. It's been in here for at least a month and a half. This is pretty loosely packed, so hopefully it's not too hard to pull out of the sphagnum moss. So far, so good. You know when the sphagnum starts to smell a bit, I don't know, mildewy? I'm not sure if that's mildewy or if it's just the algae growing on there, but you feel like that's the end of the sphagnum moss until you can clean it and boil it. I'm not a big fan of that at all. Well, the roots on this guy, you know what? I kind of think the roots on the hoffmannii are better, but this still looks all right. I think this guy was packed a little tighter. Now, when you pack sphagnum moss tight and it's decently moist, that can kind of inhibit the roots from really spreading out and branching, but also it can, you know, potentially cause root rot if that sphagnum is too moist. So this is all right, but I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the way it was really packed in there so tight, because it makes it pretty hard to get the sphagnum moss off afterwards. So I think I've gotten all the big chunks off. I'll give this guy a little rinse too. The problem with this is that if you pull too close, there's actually some root branching already happening. If you can see that close up there, there's a little bit of root branching happening on some of these. And I don't want to pull those off accidentally trying to get off the sphagnum moss that is kind of nestled around it. So these were seedlings that Lauren was selling. She had a whole bunch of them. I think Kevin at Hakuna La Planta got a bunch of these as well. She was definitely selling them in her store for a while there. I wanted to get my hands on one of her Lux hybrids, but didn't make it in time. They were all gone. So I'm hoping I'll get some from the next batch. So this looks really nice. I'll try and give you like a zoomed in shot here, but the leaf is already looking pretty good. So let's give this guy a little rinse off too. Give him a dunk over here. Get rid of what's on the roots. There's still some sphagnum on here that is difficult to get off. I could tweeze this, but don't know if it's worth the effort. So that's these guys. They are both nicely unpacked here. This is my Magnificum X Forgetii, and this is my hoffmannii Red Sinus. I'll give you guys a bit of a close-up so you can see what these guys look like in detail. So this is the hoffmannii Red Sinus. Look at that. Looking good already. It's really hard to tell what these guys will look like mature, but right now you can see this leaf's a little bit chlorotic. This guy is a little bit deformed, but this guy is looking really nice. Again, really hard to tell what these guys are going to look like when they're full grown, but they look pretty sweet. This guy here is my Mag X Forgetii. Also, this one's got a little bit more detail. You can kind of see already that there's a bit of Forgetii coming in there, but the lobes are a little bit more pronounced like a mag, but it's got the kind of fainter veining. Maybe I'm kind of anticipating a little too hard here. This one looks very Forgetii-esque from this angle. You can see it's got the heart shape, but the very faint spider-like venation. I think that should be a very nice one. So now I've got my two seedlings that are both around the same size, to be honest. I've got both of these ready to go. This being the Mag Forgetii and this one being the hoffmannii Red Sinus. I'm going to go ahead and give these guys a coating of mycorrhizal fungi. This is the Myc tree and shrub. I'm not necessarily attached to this brand. I've actually got an order, like I mentioned, of Great White on the way. This is not water soluble, so it's not maybe the best usage for me. I'll probably use these for my plants outside, but I figured, hell, these are going into tree fern. It's not going into semi-hydro, so I'm probably safe using it here. So here we go. This is the first guy ready to go here. I'm going to put him aside. Let's just put him down here for a minute. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this guy. This is the Mag Forgetii. The roots are damp, so they should stick pretty well. I think it's coming out of sphagnum moss, and I had to rinse them off, so they're pretty moist. The granules do stick on there, so that's like a pretty good coating there. You can see what I've got there going on. So I'm going to pop this guy down here too. I put this aside. Pop a lid on here so I don't accidentally flip it all over myself. Move it out of the way. So I'm just going to grab a couple of these plastic cups. These are 16-ounce plastic cups. I've got lids for them. They do actually have a straw hole in here, but it is closed. It actually gives a little bit of ventilation, so not enough to be a concern, but enough to let a little bit of air out here and there, so it's not completely a closed system. So some of that humidity will get out of the container, which is fine by me, but not all of it, and definitely not fully like lid off kind of humidity escape. So got two of these guys ready to go. I'm going to put a layer of my tree fern perlite into both of these. So let me start with this guy, kind of chunky the way it is right now. I want it to be a little bit airier, but this is all right, I think. Fluff it up a little bit. It does absorb water, the tree fern, super well, and tree fern is very well draining, so I'm not super concerned about it, but I definitely don't want like loose water in here. So I'm going to, in both of these cases, just fill the bottom and not water these anymore because the substrate's already moistened. I think that's probably enough for now. Since these plants are a little bit bigger than the ones I did earlier, and in my previous video, those were really tiny, I should have a little bit less to worry about here. I'm gonna make a little indentation here for the roots. I'm gonna do the same thing on this side. I want to leave enough room for these to be able to grow a little bit inside of the container before I have to move them to something bigger. So, okay, and then this guy, let's do the same thing. I'm losing a little bit of the myco, but it's really not a big deal. There's enough on there that it's not a concern. Okay, trying to make sure the roots are kind of pointing down as best as I can. Do the old twist here, which works well with roots, trying to squeeze them in. This guy is a little more uncooperative than its sibling. I think that's good enough. And let's pop some substrate on top here. Okay, a little bit more. So I think I'll swap these around. So this guy on the side is the forgetii. Finish potting him up, and I'll give you guys a close-up of what he looks like in his container afterwards. Let's make sure we've got enough of this material to pot him up. I think I'm covering up the bottom leaf, which I don't want to do. I'll tweak around with that afterwards to make sure that no leaves are covered and that you want to make sure all the roots are covered. These little guys, these seedlings, are notorious for having like very spidery roots that kind of pop into different directions, and they'll start even a little bit up the trunk of the plant, which can make it so that it's hard to get good coverage on the roots with the substrate. So I'm going to just kind of toss this over a little bit to the side. So this guy over here, the hoffmannii, he's got a bigger leaf on one side, which means that I'm going to have to try and kind of position him off to one side a little bit so he fits okay. I will probably have to up-pot these to a slightly larger seedling container, probably in, I don't know, the next month and a half. This is really just an interim step for now until I can get them nicely rooted, starting to grow, and then at that point I'm probably going to move them into Pon. The vast majority of the Anthuriums that I've got that are not in semi-hydro are either in moss or tree fern, and then everything else is pretty much in Pon. And I think I mentioned this in my semi-hydro gear guide video. I make my own Pon, which is a pretty common thing. A lot of people, A, Pon is, the actual lechuza Pon is pretty hard to find, and B, it's expensive. It's a lot easier to make your own, and C, I don't really necessarily like having the fertilizer built in that Pon normally comes with. So I typically make my own, which is a combination of lava rock, zeolite, and pumice. And I got mine in pretty much even portions in there. You can find those components individually, and you can buy them for, you can buy a pretty big bag, like kind of 20 to 40 liters for each one of those, pretty cheap. So you can put together like a good 60 liters of DIY Pon. You'd probably be able to get like one bag for the same price as about 60 liters. It ends up saving you an extensive amount of money just by being able to combine everything yourself. You do leave out the fertilizer, but if you really want to add that, you can buy Osmocote and you can add a chunk of Osmocote into your mix, and that effectively is the same thing. I know a lot of people don't necessarily like the DIY Pon, but I found that after my Anthuriums particularly acclimate to the DIY Pon, they do great. Like, I mean, my Lux here has put out its last 2 leaves in the DIY Pon and it's super happy. My Marmoratum here, which is in LECA, has had a bit more of a, I don't want to say a tougher time, but this one, I had this acclimate to room humidity at first, and then I moved it into my grow tent probably about 3 months ago. And since it got into the grow tent, first it put out this kind of deformed leaf, which came out, clearly it was in between 2 humidity levels and it wasn't very happy. But this guy, even a little crispy, but it's still healthy enough. And this guy here just came out literally like a week ago. And I mean, look at the size of this leaf. First off, this is a good 14 inches long. This thing is pretty massive. I'm just gonna switch it to my other hand so you can see better with the light on it. But it's got an amazing sheen on the leaf. It looks really fantastic. This is easily 14, maybe 15 inches long. I can put it next to my head for a perspective. That's a pretty long leaf. You know, I think it's lost 1 leaf since I brought it in. This was originally acquired from my favorite local plant shop, North Shore Tropicals. I think I've had this for about 1.5 years. Might have been late 2021 or early 2022 that I got this. No, I think it was late 2021. And I had this out in room humidity. It wasn't doing much of anything for the longest time. It eventually popped out this guy, which is a little crispy, and then this guy in transition. And now clearly it's a lot happier in the tent. And this guy, which is not really deformed at all and doesn't have any damage, and it just popped out in, I want to say like within a week that thing was out. So it is looking like it probably needs at least a repot. I wonder if I could even propagate this. We'll have to see. But it does look like there's the beginnings of a new, is there beginnings of a new leaf? I don't know if it's pregnant here or what's going on. There might be some action going on. It definitely got some, it looks like the beginnings of an aerial root right over here as well. So that guy's pretty happy, and I'm pretty happy because this was not an easy plant to care for or to get going in outside of my tent. Very happy to see what it's doing now. Back to what I was talking about here. These guys, yeah, they will size up and I will eventually move them into Pon, most likely my DIY Pon. And in the short term here, I'm just gonna make sure all the roots are covered up. I think there's just a little tiny aerial root popping out there, and I think we're good. Both of these look pretty decent. Both of those are looking good. Pot up to about the same level inside the cup. This one is a little bit taller. I'll give you guys a close-up while we're at it. So this is the hoffmannii red sinus. It does have its kind of damaged leaf over here from kind of transition shock, I would think. And then this is the newest leaf that came out, looking good too. Little teensy bit chlorotic, but I think it'll be happy once it's in here and it's in its own little space for a bit. This one over here is my Mag X forgetii from North Shore Tropicals. Also looking really nice. Leaves are nicely tucked in there. This will give it a little bit of space and room to keep on growing inside of its space here. It's already looking like it's gotten some good growth just since I brought it in. I believe this leaf here right in front of you has been here for, this is the newest leaf for sure. All right, so both of these guys are good to go. Put the lid's on here on both of them. I'm gonna take the labels I've got. So this guy is the hoffmannii red sinus. I did end up putting it into a new pot because I was too lazy to wash the other one. So this guy's looking good. And that's ready to go. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here, and I'm going to make a new label because this one is kind of stuffed onto the sticker that was in here. You can see how much I paid for that one. It's 40 bucks. Seedlings, not all that cheap, but you know what? This one's worth it and should be really nice. All right, so I've printed off my label for this last guy. Always satisfying. Turn off my foam memo label printer that I picked up off Amazon. If you're interested in this guy, I'll drop a link in the description. Also, I think I talked about it and gave a little bit of a tour of how the app works in my semi-hydro gear guide. If you haven't checked that video out, I will link a card to it and you can go and see it up here. Also, while I'm on that topic, if you do enjoy this kind of content and you'd like to see more of it, please do subscribe to the channel. It really helps a lot, and drop a like. I'd love to be able to get recommended to other people's feeds who have similar interests. So thanks again for watching. That all being said, why don't we label this guy up? This is the Anthurium magnificum X forgetii. Pop this on here. So now this guy is all labeled up. I actually have a surprise guest here, not a surprise guest, surprise plant that I did not mention earlier, but here we go. So this guy is another recent-ish import, and it's actually sitting in water, and I really need to repot it. But yeah, it's your special guest plant. This is Anthurium blue Papi, or the papillolaminum blue, which is hopefully going to be a really spectacular plant when it's full grown. The newest leaf on here has been growing inside of this container. I use this kind of container for keeping these guys isolated from the rest of my plants and also just keeping the humidity in. So you can see he's really pushing against the maximum container size here, and I really need to use a bigger container. But I think at this point it's just a matter of actually potting him up and actually getting him into a proper substrate now. So first off, let's take a look at the roots on this guy. Pretty good. He's been sitting on a heating mat, so the roots should be, for the most part, all right. Most of these are good. I think I could probably take off a little bit here. There's a little bit of root rot from sitting in water for a little too long, and you know what? I typically don't leave things sitting that long, but I've had a really busy week and haven't had time to get around to it. So I'm going to take off these bits of roots that are a little bit gone. Let's first off alcohol for our blade. So I've got my trusty Fiskars snips here that I use all the time. Really good quality. I would highly recommend those ones. If you have not got a good set of snips, these are really nice. I'm gonna wipe these guys down with some isopropyl alcohol. This is like 99% isopropyl alcohol, no name brand stuff. Give it a good wipe before you chop anything off, like roots. If you're propagating, if you're cutting roots, anything like that, you just don't wanna transmit bacteria between plants, even if you haven't used them for a little while. In my case, I did use them recently, so there's a couple of floppy roots that I don't really like the look of here, so I'm just gonna get rid of these guys. Let me dump these into a container for capturing some of this stuff. And it looks like it's actually got a new leaf about to pop too, which is looking good. So I'm gonna chop the ones that are floppy. So this guy's floppy. Let's give that a go. This guy is all right. I think that one's fine. I have another one or two that are looking a little floppy. This one, yeah, this one's kind of smush. Goodbye. This one at the end here, I think there's two next to each other, so. Oh, actually, these ones are all right. I'm gonna leave that one alone. This one definitely is gone. I don't know whether these are from me having these in water for a couple of weeks, it's definitely too long, or from transit. because I think they definitely had a little bit of shock from transit as well. That one looks pretty good too. All right, I'm just gonna check the root consistency here. I think this feels a little funny. Anything that's mushy, kind of brown, or working its way towards brown, I get rid of that. You can kind of see what I've pulled off there is a little browner. The rest of these are nice and green or white, which is what you want to see. This guy looks good. These are nice and firm still, firm. I don't want to break off the roots. This all looks pretty good. So I'm going to give this a little bit of a rinse real quick. Even though it was in water, I just want to make sure there's no bits of dead material on there, no dead plant matter. The rest of this looks all right. Cool. So let's get this guy going. So I think what I'm going to do with this guy is I'm actually going to pop him into Pon. So I'll let you guys take a quick look at the leaves here. So this is again Anthurium papillonaminum blue. When this guy is mature, I'll see if I can throw a picture of this guy mature up here. But when it matures, it's almost got like a greenish blue tinge to the leaves, which looks really, really nice. And these are not the easiest to come by. So I was really glad when one of my local kind of group sales got a lead on this. And they only had 4 plants and I grabbed one of them and I was really happy to get my hands on this. So you can see, hopefully that sheen is visible in the video. These are the older leaves, a little bit duller, but you can see the brand new leaf here is still got a bit of a kind of coppery bronze color to it. If I look behind, see it's coming in still a little bit coppery. And there's the older leaves, looking nice. Already starting to get the shape of a papillonaminum, and I think the coloring is starting to come in a little bit too. We'll see when this one hardens off. This one's already been hardening off for a while now, so I'm curious to see what it looks like when it's fully hardened off. So first off, I've got a little bit of sulfur dust combined with rooting hormone. This is just a kind of a half and half mix of sulfur and rooting hormone. The sulfur dust is a fungicide and a miticide. So I'm going to use this real quick. Since it's a fungicide, I'm probably not going to go with the mycorrhizal fungus for this guy. Also, like, I'm putting this into Pon, so I don't think that there's really any benefit because what I've got there is not water soluble. So in this case, I'm just going to go with a little bit of the sulfur dust combined with rooting hormone on here and hope that takes off. Since I had trimmed the roots a little bit, it gets those guys a little bit sorted out. I think we're good to go here. For this guy, I actually have my patented combo of a deli container. This is a 32-ounce deli container. Again, I talked about these guys in my gear guide video for semi-hydro. And this is, I want to say, a 4-inch orchid pot. So you can see orchid pot, it's got holes at the bottom. I have pre-cut some wicking. And again, if you want to hear anything about this stuff, I talk through all of these different accessories in my semi-hydro gear guide video. Again, hint, hint, go check it out. I'm going to pop these guys through. I think I've got my little dab tool here. This thing comes in really handy. This is actually like a cuticle pusher. I talked about this in the previous segment when I was going through my little tiny seedlings. This is for people getting their nails done. One end, the other end, they're both for messing with cuticles. I bought this to deal with some TC plantlets that I've got. I bought that in a cuticle trimmer because I was recommended to buy those. Very handy for very small cuts and very small adjustments. Turns out this cuticle pusher thing, which does look a lot like a dab tool if you're familiar, this thing is super handy. It's really great for like acting as a tiny little spade and tucking things in. And in this case, I'm pretty sure it's going to help me with the wicking. So I've got 2 strands of wicking here. I usually cut them kind of like at a 1-inch gap. So this guy is about 1 inch longer than the other, approximately. I say this one's probably about 1 foot and this one's probably about 13 inches. So I start with the shorter one and I will tuck that in here. So I'm going to run that through the holes at the bottom of my orchid pot. So I'll pop that through here and then I'm going to crisscross on the other side. And there we go. So that's the first guy done. And then I take the other guy and I kind of run through there so you can see if I get through 2 holes, and I pick the longer piece, and I tuck that in through the other holes. Alright, pop that through and we'll do the other side. So that takes care of like a number of the holes that are bigger than Pon. This is probably a little longer than it needs to be. I like to have it kind of sit inside the pot a bit so it's loose in there. Probably got these a little longer. It's going to drag a bit at the bottom of the container. You can see when it goes like this. I could have done 1 inch less on each side. There's enough room there for it to kind of wick around inside of the Pon. What I like to do, and this is what I've been doing with a lot of these anthuriums and orchid pots, is that I will, just because some of the orchid pots have a decent amount of space at the bottom still in terms of holes. I will put a little bit of LECA at the bottom first as a coating, and then I will fill the rest of it afterwards. So I'm just gonna pop a little bit of LECA in this and I'll be right back. So I put a layer at the bottom here of the LECA. This is maybe like ½ an inch worth of LECA-ish. And then I'm gonna put my Pon on top. This is just enough to block the holes at the bottom from losing too much Pon into the pot. And I like this for a couple of reasons. One, it's easy enough to pull the LECA out of the Pon after the fact, so I'm not super worried about it. It also makes it so that where the contact is with the holes in the bottom of the pot, it's just a little less difficult to untangle later on. So when I want to pull a plant's roots out of here, the LECA is easier to peel off, to be honest, and like the Pon at the top is already enough work to get off of there. And then it's just a little simpler to detangle the orchid pot and the wicking from the Anthurium inside here. Now I've got my little layer of LECA at the bottom of this pot. Now I'm going to put in some Pon and set kind of like a base layer first. So I've got some Pon here. This is pre-washed. This is again the DIY Pon. This is my version of it. I know this is pretty common. Like most people use this if you're not using the real stuff. Again, it's lava rock, pumice, and zeolite mixed together. So the blue stuff you see in here is the zeolite, which is also used for driveway ice melt, snow melt, that sort of thing. The lava rock is the black stuff, and the white stuff is pumice. The density of the particles in there is pretty much the same. Like they're all pretty equivalent size grain. It's kind of nice texture wise, they're all about equal. And you can see my bucket here. These all look pretty much identically sized. First I'm gonna measure actually the roots. See how long we're going here. So I've got pretty much a decent amount of space. This is already a pretty small plant, so I'm gonna pop this in here. So let's do a couple of scoops of the Pon, and I'm going to set up my wicks to be kind of looping through the Pon at different levels. Okay, so we've got a decent kind of base layer in there. So you can see I'm already getting a little bit of extra at the bottom, but I can just take that out now and toss it back in my container. And I'm going to adjust the wicks to be kind of at different layers through here. So they're kind of crisscrossing a bit. So I've adjusted my wicks to be a little higher up in the substrate and have a little bit better coverage. I put a teensy bit more Pon in, so all the LECA is covered up. And again, this is really easy to separate out later, so I'm not super worried about mixing substrates. And especially when you're mixing semi-hydro, the Pon is a bit of a pain in the butt, but the LECA is really easy to deal with afterwards. And again, everything has been rinsed. So now here we go. I'm gonna seat this guy so he's, you know, about yay high, and then leave myself some room to work afterwards. I'm trying not to touch the wicking material with my roots. Now I'm gonna just backfill this thing with the container itself. Okay, and now let's see if I do this here. I don't want his leaves touching the edge of the container either, so I'm gonna pull up a little bit. And I'll reseat this once I'm done. Definitely don't want the leaves to be covered by substrate either. We may end up eventually losing that bottom tiny leaf. Smooth it a little bit, put a bit more Pon in the backfill, and I think we're good. See, this bottom leaf is kind of sitting on the substrate. Not a huge fan of that. I will potentially tip it back a little bit so it's not quite in there, but it should be okay. I'm hoping with the light in the grow tent, it will just kind of adjust itself to the new lighting situation. So the other thing is that this is going out of the box, the humidity container that I had it in, and it's going to go into my grow tent. So it may look a little bit kind of lopsided right now, but I think this should straighten out because I'm looking at how the crown is positioned there, and the crown is pretty straight up. So it's just the leaves that are kind of all tilted one way because probably they've been reaching towards the light and the light was that way. So all the leaves are kind of facing out here. Once this has light coming from above, it's probably going to reorient itself. So for the time being, I can live with it being a little bit lopsided. So all right, now the next task for me here is just to water this guy in. So first I'm going to clear out the little bit of Pon substrate that worked its way out the bottom here. I can just put that back up the top. There we go. So now we've got a clean container. I'm going to label this guy. So I already had a label that was on my previous container, so I'm just going to pop it straight on here. Anthurium, Papi Blue, looking good. Label's on there, plant's ready to go. So now I just need to water this in a bit. So normally with Pon, I would water from the top. In this case, it's already damp, but at the same time, I'm just gonna do it anyways. So this is, again, the same mixture I used for the other transplants earlier. It's just water. Now I will put nutrient solution in here. I have to go and mix a batch of my nutrient solution. Right now I don't have any. So I'm just gonna leave it like that for the time being. Now, where I put the roots, I think I had the roots sitting about here was the lowest root. So I'm gonna fill with water up to about here below. This guy will be sitting probably about a centimeter above the water line. Right now, this is, I would say probably about, I could go another centimeter, centimeter and a half up there. You know, kind of 3/4 of an inch maybe. And then I would start reaching the roots, and I don't want to be going that high. So I want to be just below where the roots are. This now can go into my tent, and we are done. I hope this was entertaining, sort of educational, and you learned something. I really do appreciate your time. I am Nick from Proppist. Thank you for being here while I repotted yet another whole pile of Anthurium seedlings. These are going to look pretty awesome when they're done cooking. I really hope that they all kind of grow into magnificent creatures. In the meantime though, this guy is going in the grow tent, and the rest of these guys are going back on the heat mat until I feel like I can take them out of these humidity containers. So thanks for being here. Please subscribe if you like this kind of content. Drop a like below. If you want to hit that notifications bell, you are welcome to as well. I will be posting more content like this on a regular basis. Please check back for the next time. In the meantime, feel free to check out one of my previous videos. I'll link it over here. Enjoy and have a good one. Thanks.